Usually when we talk about solving a problem, um, whether that's getting a medical diagnosis or fixing a broken engine, there's this deep expectation of precision.
Right, it's very much like engineering.
Exactly. I mean, you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on your radius, and the doctor just points at the film and says, well, there's the problem.
Yeah, we put a cast on it, the bone knits, and you're done.
Right. And we crave that visibility. We want to find the broken piece, swap in a new one, and just move on with our lives.
It is deeply comforting because it's binary, you know? The
Yeah.
bone is either broken or it isn't. The problem is localized, it's visible, and the intervention is totally direct.
But the moment you step out of the realm of simple mechanics and you step into the world of human organizations or corporate strategy or global ecosystems, that x-ray machine becomes entirely useless.
Oh, completely useless.
You look at the diagnostic landscape of a failing company or a really toxic corporate culture,
Mm.
and it is overwhelmingly murky.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, the cause and the effect are almost never in the same room.
And that brings us to the relatable, honestly incredibly frustrating paradox at the heart of today's deep dive.
It's a big one.
We are looking at a fundamental question for you today. Why do incredibly smart people working with the absolute best intentions repeatedly create failing strategies, toxic work environments, or just fundamentally terrible products?
Yeah, how do rooms completely packed with literal geniuses end up building systems that nobody actually wants?
Exactly. Today, we are taking a massive stack of source material to figure out the mechanics of that failure. We're pulling from the absolute heavyweights of management, design, and systems thinking.
We're pulling together threads that don't usually get woven together in a standard business class.
Right, we've got Danilo Meadows thinking in systems, Peter Senge's The Fifth Discipline.
Plus Richard Rumelt on strategy and Tim Brown on design thinking.
It's a gold mine. And the mission for you, listening right now, is to fundamentally shift your perspective. We're going to help you move away from seeing the world as a series of isolated snapshots or independent events.
Snapshots like, sales are down, or the CEO got fired, or the product launched late.
Right, those are just snapshots. Instead, we're going to learn how to see the invisible, interconnected structures that actually dictate human behavior and business outcomes.
And by the time we reach the end of this deep dive, you are going to understand exactly why the typical managerial urge to just find a scapegoat, to blame the individual or to implement a quick fix isn't just a little bit misguided.
It's structurally doomed.
Exactly. It is structurally and mathematically doomed to fail.
So let's start with the anatomy of the invisible. To understand why things fail, we have to actually define what a system is.
Right, because reading through the material, particularly the foundational systems theory, they make a massive distinction between a system and just a pile of stuff.
And the distinction is everything, right? I mean, a system isn't just a conglomeration of parts. It has to have three distinct interacting components.
Elements, interconnections, and a function or purpose.
But I want to push back on that distinction for a second.
Mhm.
Because intuitively, if I look at a pile of sand on the side of the road, it has elements, right? The grains of sand.
Sure.
And it has interconnections, I guess, like gravity and friction holding them together in a mount. Isn't that a system of sand?
It has elements, yes, but it lacks a cohesive purpose, and its interconnections are purely happenstance. Think about it this way. If you take a broom and sweep away half of that sand, what do you have left?
You just had a smaller pile of sand.
Exactly. It hasn't lost its core identity. You can divide a pile of sand in half indefinitely, and its fundamental nature remains completely unchanged.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Now apply that same logic to a human digestive system or a public school or a Fortune 500 company. If you arbitrarily sweep away half the elements, like if you remove the stomach from the digestive system or you fire all the teachers from the school, you don't just have a smaller version of the same thing.
You have a catastrophic failure.
You have a corpse or an empty building.
Mm.
The entity loses its systemness. It ceases to function because the integrity of the whole relies on the specific interconnections and the overarching purpose.
So the system is defined by its wholeness. The elements are just the things we can easily see and touch, right?
Exactly.
Like in a company, that's the employees, the physical factory, the server racks, the cash in the bank.
The elements are highly visible, which is exactly why we obsess over them. Think about it. When a sports team is losing, what is the very first thing that ownership does?
They fire the head coach, they swap out an element.
Because it's easy, it's visible, and it feels like taking action.
Right, it looks like you're doing something.
But the literature points out that changing an element usually has the least impact on the overall system. The interconnections, the rules, the flow of information, the reporting structures, and most importantly, the purpose of the system are infinitely more crucial.
And when we talk about purpose, the sources make a fascinating distinction here. The purpose of a system is not what it says it does. The purpose is what it actually does.
That is such a critical point.
Right? Like if a government says its purpose is to protect the environment, but it consistently allocates 90% of its budget to subsidizing fossil fuels, the systemic purpose is fossil fuel expansion.
Yes, you deduce the purpose from the behavior, not the rhetoric. The behavior of a system is the truest indicator of its underlying structure.
Which brings up, honestly, the most illuminating analogy from the reading. The Slinky paradigm.
I love this one.
It's so good. Okay, picture a classic metal Slinky spring toy. You're holding it up by the top coil, and the bottom of the spring is dangling down toward the floor.
Yep, got it.
Now, you open your hand, the Slinky drops, hits the ground, and oscillates. It bounces up and down for a few seconds. If I asked a random person on the street what caused the Slinky to bounce, what would they say?
They would say, well, you did. You opened your hand and dropped it.
Exactly. Because we are biologically wired to look for the immediate triggering event, action-reaction.
Cause and effect.
Right. But if we dig into the physics, the hand is just a trigger. Because if I hold a coffee mug in the exact same way, at the exact same height, and open my hand, it doesn't bounce.
It shatters into 100 pieces.
It makes a huge mess. So the core thesis here, and this is arguably the single most important concept in systems thinking, is that the behavior of a system is caused by its own internal structure.
Yes. The hand removed a countering force, but the latent potential for oscillation was entirely contained within the helical structure of the metal spring.
The structure of the spring is the actual root cause of the bounce.
Right. But taking that concept, that structure dictates behavior, and applying it to human beings is incredibly uncomfortable.
Oh, people hate it.
They do. With a metal toy, it makes sense. But when a company produces a toxic culture where employees are burning out, or a government agency chronically fails to deliver services, we fight tooth and nail against looking at the structure.
We immediately want to find the hand that dropped the Slinky. We want an external event or a malicious middle manager to blame.
We resist it because looking at the structure requires us to acknowledge dynamic complexity. And frankly, human beings are terrible at processing dynamic complexity.
Let's define that, because the reading breaks complexity down into two very different categories: detail complexity and dynamic complexity.
So detail complexity is when you are dealing with a massive number of variables, but they interact in highly predictable, static ways.
Like a jigsaw puzzle.
Or assembling a Boeing 777 commercial jet. It involves millions of individual parts. It requires an encyclopedic level of detail. But if you follow the exact same instructions 10 times, you will get the exact same airplane 10 times.
Right. The relationships between the rivets and the aluminum panels don't spontaneously change overnight.
Exactly. It's complicated, but it's linear. Dynamic complexity, on the other hand, occurs when cause and effect are subtle and they're separated in time and space.
Time and space, right. So the interventions you make today might not show their true effects for months or even years.
Right. And when those effects finally surface, they might pop up in a completely different, seemingly unrelated department.
So an example of dynamic complexity wouldn't be building a jet. It would be something like the global macroeconomic response to an interest rate hike.
Or a geopolitical arms race. Or, honestly, even just a family dinner where two relatives have decades of unresolved tension.
Oh, man. Family dinners are peak dynamic complexity.
They really are. The number of parts is very small, maybe just 4 people at a table. But the system is intensely dynamically complex because a single misplaced comment about the mashed potatoes can trigger a massive, nonlinear emotional explosion.
All based on an event that happened 10 years ago.
Exactly.
I was thinking about why our brains short-circuit when faced with dynamic complexity. And it really comes down to our evolutionary biology, doesn't it?
Oh, 100%.
We evolved on the savanna as hunter-gatherers. If a predator, like a saber-toothed tiger, jumps out of the tall grass, that is an immediate, localized event.
You have a split second to make a binary choice, run or fight.
Right. If you stop to map out the tiger's 10-year ecosystem feedback loops and the impact of the local rainfall on its prey availability, you get eaten.
You are lunch. We are perfectly adapted to react to sudden, localized events.
But in the modern corporate world, there are very few saber-toothed tigers.
Very true.
Most of the threats that destroy companies or societies are slow-moving, invisible, and dynamically complex.
Things like the slow erosion of brand trust or the gradual accumulation of technical debt in a software platform.
Or climate change.
Yes, we don't see them until the system is already collapsing.
And that fundamental biological blind spot is exposed perfectly in the famous beer game simulation.
Oh, the beer game. This is a staple in systems thinking literature.
It really perfectly illustrates how incredibly smart people are routinely defeated by simple dynamic complexity.
For anyone who hasn't encountered this, it was developed at MIT back in the 1960s.
And what's amazing is that you can run this simulation with high school students, or you can run it with top-tier Fortune 500 CEOs, and the result is almost universally identical.
It always ends in tears.
Always. Let me set the stage for you. You put people in a room and assign them roles in a highly simplified supply chain for a brand of beer.
You have 4 stations: a retailer, a wholesaler, a distributor, and a factory.
There's no detailed complexity here. It's just simple arithmetic. The only thing they have to do is manage their inventory to meet consumer demand.
But the rules are strict. They cannot talk to each other.
Right. No whispering across the room.
They can only communicate by passing order slips up the chain and receiving beer deliveries down the chain.
And crucially, there are built-in delays. It takes 2 weeks for an order to move up the chain and 2 weeks for the physical beer to be shipped down the chain.
That 4-week lag is the source of the dynamic complexity.
So the game starts. And for the first few weeks, consumer demand is steady at 4 cases of beer per week.
Everyone orders 4 cases, everyone receives 4 cases. The system is in perfect equilibrium.
Then in week 5, the simulation throws a tiny pebble into the pond. Consumer demand bumps up to 8 cases per week, and it stays there.
Just a flat, predictable 8 cases. It's the mildest possible change.
But let's walk through the mechanics of how that small bump destroys the entire supply chain.
Okay, so week 5 hits. The retailer sells 8 cases, but they only receive the 4 cases they ordered weeks ago.
Right, so their inventory jips.
They get a little nervous, so they send an order up to the wholesaler for 12 cases, just trying to restock.
But remember the delay. The wholesaler won't even see that order for 12 cases until week 7.
Right. In the meantime, the wholesaler is still getting the old steady orders of 4 cases, so the wholesaler thinks everything is totally fine.
But by week 7, the retailer is full-on panicking. They've had 3 straight weeks of higher demand, they're completely out of beer, and they have a backlog of angry customers.
So the retailer starts ordering 20 cases a week, hoping anything will arrive.
Now the wholesaler finally receives that first bumped-up order of 12 cases. Their inventory takes a hit.
Then the next week, they get the panic order for 20 cases.
The wholesaler looks at this massive spike in demand and extrapolates. They think, wow, beer sales are exploding.
So they send an emergency order to the distributor for 30 cases.
And by the time this signal reaches the factory, the original bump of just 4 extra cases has been amplified into absolute hysteria.
The factory looks at the order slips and concludes that the entire country is dying of thirst.
They max out their production lines. They're running shifts, 247, to brew massive quantities of beer.
This is a classic systemic phenomenon known as the bullwhip effect. A tiny flick of the wrist at the consumer end creates a massive, violent crack of the whip at the manufacturing end.
And then the tragedy hits. Because of the shipping delays, all that mass-produced beer takes weeks to travel back down the chain.
While the beer is in transit, the retailer's customer backlog is eventually met. Demand goes back to that steady 8 cases a week.
But the massive tidal wave of panic-ordered beer is already in the trucks.
Right. Suddenly, the retailer, who is begging for beer, starts receiving shipments of 50, 60, 70 cases a week.
They have nowhere to put it. They stop ordering completely.
Then the wholesaler is flooded with inventory and stops ordering.
The factory, which just spent a fortune ramping up production, suddenly sees their orders drop to 0.
The game ends with everyone sitting on mountains of useless, expensive inventory, completely bankrupt.
And when the facilitators turn the lights on and end the game, what is the very first thing the players do?
They immediately start screaming at each other.
Exactly. The retailer turns to the factory and says, "Why did you flood me with all this beer? You ruined my margins."
And the factory yells back, "Because you ordered it. Your erratic ordering forced me to overproduce."
They immediately blame the individuals. They look for the malicious hand that dropped the slinky.
What they fail to realize, and this is the chilling takeaway from the sources, is that the people didn't fail. The structure of the system forced their hand.
Every single person in that chain made a locally rational decision based on the delayed information they had at their specific station.
Right. My inventory's low, I better order extra just to be safe. It's entirely logical on a micro level.
But structurally catastrophic on a macro level. If you swap those players out and put a brilliant financial analyst in the retailer seat and a ruthless tech CEO in the factory seat, the exact collapse happens.
Because the behavior is latent in the structure. The delays and the lack of transparent information flow guarantee the boom and bust cycle, regardless of who is actually pulling the levers.
So let's transition this to the real world. If the structure of a system dictates our behavior, why is our instinct, even when we know better, to find a scapegoat?
It's a great question.
Like when a product launch fails, why do we look around the boardroom for someone to fire?
It comes back to a psychological defensive mechanism that Peter Senge calls the enemy is out there syndrome.
The enemy is out there.
Right. It is profoundly uncomfortable to admit that we are part of a structure that is producing bad results, because that implies we have to change our own behavior or our own mental models.
Senge illustrates this with an incredibly poignant, almost funny anecdote about a Little League baseball game.
Oh, the kid in the outfield.
Yes. There's a kid playing right field. It's a sunny day. High fly ball comes his way. He gets under it. The ball bounces out of his glove, and he drops it.
We've all been there.
A few innings later, another fly ball, he drops that one too. By the third drop ball, this kid is absolutely furious. He throws his leather glove into the dirt, stomps into the dugout, and screams at the top of his lungs, "No one can catch a ball on that darn field."
He literally blames the geometry of the grass and the dirt for his own lack of coordination.
Exactly. It's a defense mechanism. To admit that he lacks the skill to catch the ball damages his ego. To blame the external environment preserves his ego.
We laugh at the kid, but corporate boardrooms do the exact same thing every single day.
Oh, constantly.
When a major strategic initiative flops, the executive team almost never says, "Our internal structure and our flawed incentive models made this failure inevitable."
No, they say, the macroeconomic environment shifted unpredictably.
Or, "The competitors played dirty and undercut our pricing."
Or, my personal favorite, the algorithm changed.
Right. By blaming an external enemy, we absolve ourselves of having to do the hard, painful work of examining the complex, invisible system that we ourselves helped build.
We maintain our illusion of control by pointing at a localized event.
But eventually, pointing fingers isn't enough. The company is bleeding money or the product is failing, and management decides they have to act. They need a solution.
And because they are trapped in an event-oriented mindset, they almost always reach for the quick fix. They want to push a button and make the immediate pain stop.
And from a systems thinking perspective, pushing a quick fix onto a dynamically complex system is incredibly dangerous, because the system will always push back.
Reading about this made me think of one of the most tragic characters in literature. Boxer the horse, from George Orwell's Animal Farm.
Oh, that's a brilliant connection.
If you remember the book, Boxer is this massive, incredibly strong, deeply loyal cart horse. And whenever anything goes wrong on the farm, whether the windmill collapses or the food rations run low, Boxer doesn't analyze the political structure of the farm.
No, he just repeats his personal mantra, "I will work harder."
Right. It's a noble, deeply relatable sentiment. It's the ultimate quick fix. Apply more raw effort.
But the tragedy of Boxer is that his quick fix was actively destructive. The harder he worked, the more the pigs who ran the farm were able to manipulate the system to exploit him.
His massive output of labor masked the underlying corruption and inefficiency of the farm's leadership.
His well-intentioned diligence kept a broken system afloat just long enough for it to become a complete tyranny, and ultimately, it worked him literally to death.
In the vocabulary of systems theory, what Boxer experienced is called compensating feedback.
Right. This is the phenomenon where a well-intentioned intervention calls forth a systemic response that completely offsets the intended benefits.
Give me a real-world example of that. Where do we see compensating feedback today?
The classic example in urban planning is highway congestion.
Oh, sure.
Let's say a city has a massive traffic problem on a major commuter highway. The public is angry, politicians are feeling the heat, so they demand a quick fix. The most obvious, linear solution is, well, build another lane.
We need more capacity, so let's pour more concrete. It makes logical sense.
But they aren't accounting for dynamic complexity. They spend millions of dollars in 3 years building the new lane. When it opens, traffic flows beautifully. The quick fix worked.
For about 10 minutes.
Exactly, because then the compensating feedback kicks in.
Induced demand.
Yes, induced demand. Because the highway is now faster and less congested, it becomes a more attractive route. People who used to take public transit start driving.
People who used to stagger their commute to avoid rush hour start driving right at 8 a.m.
Developers realize the commute is easier, so they build new housing tracts further out in the suburbs, injecting thousands of new cars into the network.
Within 2 or 3 years, the new lane is completely choked with traffic.
The congestion is just as bad as it was before, but now the city has a massive new infrastructure maintenance bill, and public transit revenue has tanked.
They pushed on the system with a quick fix, and the system pushed back, leaving everyone worse off.
This mechanism, solving a symptom but worsening the underlying disease, leads directly into one of the most common and destructive systems archetypes that Peter Senge outlines. He calls it shifting the burden.
Shifting the burden. And there's a phenomenal, albeit hypothetical, case study in the source material about a company called WonderTech that maps this out perfectly.
WonderTech is a masterclass in how a company can quietly commit suicide while staring at spreadsheets that tell them everything is fine.
Let's really break this down because the mechanics here apply to almost every startup or fast-growing company. WonderTech is a brilliant, high-tech manufacturing firm. They launch with an incredible product, and their early sales are explosive. Growth is going through the roof.
But because they are growing so fast, their manufacturing facility gets completely overwhelmed. They can't produce the widgets fast enough.
So a symptom appears: worsening delivery times. In their first year, maybe they promised a 4-week delivery.
Yeah.
By year 2, customers are waiting 8, 10, even 14 weeks to get their products.
The symptom is causing immediate pain.
In the shifting the burden archetype, management is faced with a choice between 2 paths: a fundamental response and a symptomatic response.
Right. And the fundamental response is the true cure. In WonderTech's case, the fundamental response is obvious but painful. Build a new, larger factory. Increase capacity.
But let's put ourselves in the shoes of the WonderTech executives. Building a new factory requires massive capital expenditure. It requires taking on debt.
And more importantly, because of the delays inherent in dynamic complexity, building a factory takes 2 or 3 years. It will not solve the delivery time problem tomorrow.
The executives look at the balance sheet and get cold feet. They say, let's not overextend ourselves. Let's hold off on the massive factory investment and see if demand levels out.
But they still have angry customers today, so they shift the burden to a symptomatic response.
They apply a Band-Aid.
Exactly. The symptomatic response is usually behavioral. They tell the sales team to manage customer expectations.
They send out apology baskets.
They might even tweak the sales incentives to prioritize accounts that are willing to wait. They focus entirely on soothing the symptom of the long wait times rather than fixing the structural bottleneck.
And here is the truly insidious part of the trap. Over the next few quarters, the delivery times actually start to improve.
The backlog shrinks.
Wait times go from 14 weeks down to 10 weeks, down to 8 weeks. The management team looks at the metrics and breathes a huge sigh of relief.
They pat each other on the back and say, wow, we navigated that crisis beautifully. Good thing we didn't waste millions of dollars building that new factory, right?
Wait, if they didn't build a new factory and they didn't increase capacity, how did the delivery times improve?
This is the invisible balancing loop that is so hard to see. The delivery times didn't improve because WonderTech got better at making widgets. The delivery times improved because the frustrated customers simply gave up and walked away.
Oh, wow.
Word got out in the marketplace that WonderTech was completely unreliable. Competitors swooped in and picked off their key accounts. The order volume plummeted.
With fewer orders coming in the door, the overworked existing factory was finally able to catch up.
Exactly. The symptom, the long delivery time, vanished. The immediate pain was cured. But the overall health of the company was quietly gutted.
They permanently lost their market share and stunted their growth curve. The disease was cured by starving the patient.
And because of the time delay between the decision not to build the factory and the eventual drop in sales, I guarantee the management team didn't connect the two events.
Of course not. A year later, when revenue takes a nosedive, they don't look back at their capital expenditure freeze. They blame the sales team.
Why aren't you closing deals? Why is our pipeline drying up? The enemy is out there. Syndrome strikes again.
And what's really sad is that this leads directly into a secondary trap that Donella Meadows calls the drift to low performance. WonderTech's revenue drops, but instead of fixing the core issue, They normalize the failure.
Right. They adjust their internal standards to match their deteriorating reality. Instead of fighting to get back to a 4-week delivery time and massive growth, they look at the new numbers and say, well, an 8-week delivery time is industry standard anyway, and our sales aren't doing that much worse than last quarter.
They slowly boil the frog, accepting poorer and poorer performance until the company goes bankrupt.
It's tragic.
Okay, this is terrifying. If the quick fix is a trap, if shifting the burden destroys market share, and if we are psychologically hardwired to look for scapegoats instead of structural flaws, how do we actually solve problems in a complex world?
We have to change our approach entirely.
Right, like if Henry Ford's famous quip is right, that if he asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse.
Yeah.
How do we break out of this linear, event-oriented thinking?
This is where we bring in the work of Tim Brown and the concept of design thinking. If you want an antidote to the quick fix, design thinking is it.
Okay, let's get into it.
Because the core philosophy of design thinking is that you cannot solve a problem by looking at it in isolation. You have to step back and look at the entire context of the user, the environment, and the unstated emotional needs, not just the technical specifications of the product.
The source material highlights an incredible project that Tim Brown's design firm, IDEO, did with Shimano. This case study perfectly illustrates how to bypass the faster horse trap.
That's a brilliant example.
Let's set the baseline. Shimano is a massive Japanese manufacturer of bicycle components. They make gears, brakes, derailleurs, and they are brilliant at it. Incredible, precision-engineered, ultra-lightweight components for serious cyclists and professional athletes.
But in the United States, Shimano's growth was flattening out. The high-end market was saturated.
Now, if Shimano applied a traditional linear quick fix, what would they do? They would look at their declining sales, turn to their engineers and say, we need a new product to boost revenue. Design a gear set that is 5% lighter or shifts 10% faster and add some carbon fiber.
Which is an event-oriented solution. It assumes the problem is simply that their current product isn't technologically advanced enough. It completely ignores the larger system of bicycle culture in America.
Right. But instead of doing that, Shimano partnered with IDEO to apply design thinking. And the very first thing IDEO did was ignore Shimano's existing customers.
They completely ignored them.
Because if you ask a guy in spandex riding a $5,000 road bike what he wants, he will ask for a faster horse. He wants a lighter gear.
Exactly. Instead, IDEO went out to study extreme users and, critically, non-users. They looked at the massive demographic of American adults, about 90% of them who rode bikes as kids, loved it, but haven't touched a bicycle in 20 years.
And what's fascinating here is how they conducted this research. They didn't send out a sterile survey or run a focus group in a conference room.
Traditional market research is terrible at uncovering latent needs because people don't know how to articulate a desire for something that doesn't exist yet.
Right.
So IDEO used anthropological observation. They went to people's homes, they watched them try to buy bikes, they stood in retail stores and just observed the emotional reactions of casual consumers.
And what they discovered was a massive systemic barrier. The problem wasn't the technology at all. The problem was the retail and cultural environment.
They saw that normal adults were actively intimidated by modern cycling.
You walk into a high-end bike shop,
Yeah.
and it is terrifying. The staff are treating it like an elite sport. The bikes have dozens of exposed cables, fragile derailleurs, and 21 different gears.
The saddles are rock hard.
Right. It looks high maintenance, expensive, and dangerous.
But juxtaposed against that anxiety, almost every single person they interviewed had a deeply joyful, nostalgic memory of being a kid on a simple coaster bike.
Just the wind in their hair, the freedom of pedaling down the street without thinking about gear ratios or heart rate monitors.
So the latent need wasn't for better performance. The latent need was for simplicity and joy. How do you design for that?
That's the million-dollar question.
Tim Brown explains that design thinking requires balancing 3 overlapping constraints within a complex system: feasibility, viability, and desirability.
Let's break those down.
Feasibility is what is technologically possible. Can our engineers actually build this? Viability is what makes business sense. Can we manufacture it at a price point that yields a profit?
Makes sense.
And desirability is the human element. Does this product make emotional and practical sense to a real human being? Most corporate quick fixes only solve for feasibility and viability. They engineer a cheaper, faster widget and assume people will want it.
But the Shimano coasting bike solved for all three by prioritizing desirability first. IDEO and Shimano didn't design a new gear, they designed an entirely new category of bicycle.
It looked like a retro cruiser. Big, comfortable seat, swept back handlebars so you sit upright.
And critically, no exposed cables, no complicated shifters on the handles. To stop, you just pedal backward exactly like you did when you were 8 years old.
But here is where the feasibility constraint comes in a brilliant way. The bike looked simple, but it wasn't a dumb piece of metal.
Oh, not at all. Under the hood, in the rear hub, Shimano engineered a highly sophisticated, completely hidden automatic transmission.
It used an internal centrifugal clutch to automatically shift gears based on the speed of the bike, without the rider ever having to pull a lever or think about it.
That is the magic. They embraced the massive technical complexity of an automatic hub in order to deliver an experience of pure simplicity to the user.
They didn't just build a bike, they designed a systemic intervention. They even created a PR campaign, mapping out safe, flat, scenic routes in major cities so people would have a non-intimidating place to ride.
By stepping back from the localized problem, how do we make a better gear? And looking at the systemic problem, why are adults terrified of bicycles? They tapped into a massive new revenue stream and reconnected thousands of people to the joy of riding.
It's a triumph of systems thinking.
So we know the traps. We've mapped out the tendency to blame the individual, the danger of compensating feedback, the tragedy of shifting the burden, and the slow death of drifting to low performance.
And we've seen how stepping back and applying design thinking can navigate the complexity.
But there is a glaring question hanging over all of this. What happens when the person caught in these systemic traps is the CEO?
Right, that's where the rubber meets the road.
It is one thing for a design firm to build a new bicycle. It is an entirely different level of complexity for a chief executive to design the strategic direction of a massive multinational corporation. How do leaders actually use systems thinking to form a strategy?
That is the ultimate crucible. Because a CEO doesn't just have to understand the system, they have to exert the political will to change it.
To dive into this, the sources bring in Richard Rumelt and his phenomenal book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And Rumelt starts by stripping away all the corporate jargon.
He really does. He has a wonderfully concise, almost brutal definition of what a strategy actually is. He says strategy is simply the application of strength against weakness, or applying your organization's greatest advantage to the most promising opportunity.
It sounds incredibly obvious, but Rumelt spends a lot of time dissecting why bad strategy is so ubiquitous. Walk into almost any Fortune 500 company, read their strategic plan, and you'll usually find a document filled with bad strategy.
And one of the biggest red flags for a bad strategy, according to Rumelt, is if the strategy has universal buy-in across the entire organization.
This point usually shocks management teams.
Oh, it terrifies them.
Wait, I have to stop you there, because isn't universal buy-in the holy grail of corporate leadership? Every management book talks about getting alignment, getting everyone on the bus, rowing in the same direction. Why is universal buy-in a sign of a terrible strategy?
Because it is a myth that masks cowardice. Real strategy is not a vague, fluffy wish list of mom and apple pie goals.
Right.
If your strategy statement is, we will be the industry-leading provider of customer-centric, innovative solutions, of course you have universal buy-in. No one is going to disagree with being innovative and customer-centric, but that statement provides zero direction.
It's just a statement of desire. It's not a plan of action.
Exactly. A true strategy requires focusing immense energy and resources on a specific, narrow path. And the laws of physics and economics dictate that focusing energy in one area inherently means you must withdraw it from another. You have to say no.
It means the marketing budget for legacy products will be slashed. It means an entire department's pet project will be killed. It means people will lose status, and some might lose their jobs.
So if everyone in the company is perfectly happy and comfortable with the new strategic plan, it does not mean the CEO is a genius consensus builder. It means the strategy has no teeth.
It signals that leadership lack the political capital or the courage to make a hard, painful choice that would upset a specific faction within the company. Universal buy-in usually means the complete absence of choice. Okay, if a good strategy requires making hard, unpopular choices and focusing all of your limited energy on a specific point, how do you know you're pushing on the right thing?
You have to find the leverage points.
Right, if the system is dynamically complex and pushing the wrong button causes compensating feedback, how do you find the right lever to actually change the system?
This brings us back to Donella Meadows, and it introduces the concept of leverage points. And to visualize what a leverage point is, Buckminster Fuller had this beautiful, elegant analogy, the trim tab.
This is one of my absolute favorite visuals from the entire reading.
It's great. Imagine a massive 1,000-foot-long ocean liner moving at full speed through the water. It has incredible momentum. Turning that ship is incredibly difficult.
The main rudder at the back of the ship is huge, and it has to push against thousands of tons of rushing water. It requires massive hydraulic engines just to turn the rudder a few degrees.
But attached to the trailing edge of that huge main rudder is a tiny secondary rudder, just a sliver of metal. That is the trim tab.
Exactly. When the pilot on the bridge wants to turn the massive ship, they don't fight the main rudder, they turn the tiny trim tab.
Moving the trim tab is easy. It requires very little energy, but turning it creates a small pocket of low pressure in the water. That low pressure pulls the massive main rudder over, and the main rudder then turns the entire massive ship.
A tiny, highly focused exertion of effort in exactly the right place creates a disproportionate, massive change in the entire system. That is strategic leverage.
But the tragedy of corporate strategy is that most leaders push on the system in the places where there is the least amount of leverage. Donella Meadows created a hierarchy of leverage points, ranking them from lowest effectiveness to highest effectiveness.
And it is incredibly telling that governments and CEOs spend almost all their time fighting over the absolute lowest form of leverage.
You're talking about tweaking the numbers.
Yes. Parameters, constants, numbers. Subsidies, taxes, quotas, interest rates, minimum wage, budget allocations.
We spend 90% of our political discourse and our corporate boardroom energy fighting over numbers. Should we cut the budget by 10% or 12%? Should we raise the price of the widget by $1?
It makes complete sense why we do it. Numbers are highly visible, they are easy to measure, and most importantly, they are fully within management's illusion of control. A CEO can mandate a 10% budget cut with a single memo. It feels like powerful action.
But Meadows argues that changing a number rarely changes the underlying structure of the system.
It almost never does.
Think of the system like the plumbing in a house. Tweaking a number, like raising a tax or cutting a budget, is just changing the speed of the water flowing through the pipes. It might slow a leak or speed up a drain, but it doesn't reroute the plumbing.
If the plumbing is fundamentally broken, pumping the water faster doesn't fix it. To find real trim tabs, you have to go deeper into the structure.
So if numbers are low leverage, what is higher up the hierarchy? Where are the real trim tabs?
Well, a significantly higher leverage point is changing the information flows. This means giving people access to information they didn't have before at the exact moment they need to make a decision.
Meadows has a great, simple example of this. During an energy crisis, they wanted people to use less electricity in a housing development.
The low leverage approach changing the numbers would be to slightly raise the price of electricity. But people usually just grumble and pay the higher bill.
Right, it doesn't change the behavior. The high leverage approach was to take the electric meter, which is usually hidden down in the dark basement, and move it to the front hallway of the house, right where everyone can see it spinning wildly when the air conditioning kicks on.
By changing the flow of information and making the feedback loop visible and immediate, consumption dropped by 30%. They didn't change the price, they didn't pass a new law, they just rerouted the information.
What's even higher leverage than information flows?
Changing the rules of the system. The rules dictate the incentives, the punishments, and the boundaries. If you change the rules of a game, you completely change the behavior of the players.
If a corporation has a rule that executives only get their bonuses if quarterly profits hit a certain target, the executives will ruthlessly gut long-term research and development just to hit the short-term number.
You can yell at them to be innovative all you want, but the rule dictates the behavior. Change the rule, tie bonuses to 10-year sustainability metrics, and the behavior changes overnight.
And the absolute highest leverage point, the ultimate trim tab.
The paradigm, the unstated, deeply held mindset or belief system out of which the entire system arises.
This is deep waters. Give me an example of paradigm.
Well, the paradigm of modern capitalism is endless economic growth is good and necessary. Every rule, every information flow, every tax number, every corporate strategy is twisted to serve that unstated goal.
If you try to fix environmental destruction by tweaking a tax number while leaving the endless growth paradigm intact, the system will just find a way around the tax.
Changing a paradigm, shifting a society from a mindset of endless growth to a mindset of sustainable equilibrium is incredibly difficult. But if you can achieve it, it is the most profoundly powerful leverage point in existence, because the new paradigm will automatically rewrite all the rules and numbers beneath it.
But here is the friction. If leverage points, especially changing rules and paradigms, are so powerful, Why do highly paid, highly educated CEOs consistently miss them? Why are they stuck in the boardroom arguing over a 2% budget cut?
It comes back to a structural limitation of the human mind called bounded rationality.
Let's unpack that.
Bounded rationality means that none of us, not even the most brilliant CEO, has a God's eye omniscient view of the whole system.
We all exist in a localized environment. We make decisions based on the limited information we have, the local incentives we face, and our own cognitive biases.
It's the classic parable of the blind men touching different parts of the elephant. The guy touching the trunk thinks he's holding a snake. The guy touching the massive leg thinks he's hugging a tree.
They are both making rational conclusions based on their local data, but they are both fundamentally wrong about the whole beast.
In a corporate setting, the VP of sales sees a completely different elephant than the VP of engineering.
Exactly. And they both make locally rational decisions that optimize their own departments, but which might completely undermine the entire company. And when things go wrong because of their bounded rationality, they can't see the systemic cause, so they revert to the quick fix.
There is a quote in the sources that captures this exhaustion perfectly. It's from John Mnuchin, a former executive at Ford, talking about their Project Alpha.
Oh yes, the find and fix culture.
He describes the culture at Ford as an endless, frenzied search for the find and fix solution. A problem pops up on the assembly line, a manager rushes in, slaps a localized Band-Aid on it, and declares victory.
But because they didn't fix the systemic structure, the problem just migrates to a different part of the line a week later.
Mnuchin says the find and fix experts go on forever, just running around with fire extinguishers, putting out localized fires without ever stepping back to ask who is secretly pouring gasoline on the floor.
It requires an immense amount of intellectual humility to put down the fire extinguisher, step back, and admit that you don't fully understand the system.
You have to admit that your localized view is flawed. And frankly, the modern corporate culture of the hero CEO actively punishes that kind of humility.
Peter Senge shares a story in The Fifth Discipline that illustrates the danger of the hero CEO perfectly. He was consulting with a very forceful, highly charismatic CEO of a large tech firm.
And the CEO was deeply frustrated.
He pulls Senge into his office and starts lamenting. My organization completely lacks visionary leaders. I look around my executive team and all I see are compliant followers. Nobody pushes back on my ideas. Nobody takes independent risks. They just wait for me to tell them what to do.
A classic complaint from a hard-driving executive. But what did the CEO fail to see through his bounded rationality?
He failed to see his own shadow. He failed to see himself as a node in the system. Senge realized that the CEO was so intimidating, so forceful in articulating his own brilliant, aggressive ideas in meetings that he subconsciously crushed any attempt at dissent.
If a junior executive proposed a risky idea, the CEO would immediately interrogate it, find the flaws, and tear it apart to prove his own intellectual dominance.
Over time, the system learned. The executives learned that the safest, most rational behavior was just to stay quiet and agree. The CEO's own behavior created the exact compliance he was complaining about.
This is what Senge calls a defensive routine. It is a subconscious psychological armor that protects the CEO from the immense pain of realizing that he is the source of his own problems.
Leaders struggle to embrace systems thinking because doing so requires abandoning the myth of the heroic, omnipotent leader who can control an organization from the top down.
It requires looking in the mirror and admitting the most terrifying truth of systems theory.
Yeah.
Our own actions create our reality.
Yeah, that is a brutally tough pill to swallow. If you have spent 30 years climbing the corporate ladder to become the CEO, you want to believe you are the master of the universe.
Admitting that you are just a node in a dynamically complex feedback loop, and that your forceful personality might actually be the thing breaking the information flows you desperately rely on, that takes a rare, almost unprecedented level of self-awareness.
And without that self-awareness, without the willingness to expose your own mental models to critique, you get universal buy-in on bad strategies. You get executives shifting the burden on production delays. You get the slow, tragic drift to low performance.
So to bring this massive journey all together for you listening, if you want to fix a failing strategic initiative, or heal a toxic corporate culture, or even design a product that people genuinely love and need, you have to change how you look at the world.
You have to stop looking for the jagged white line on the X-ray.
You have to stop searching for the scapegoat. The grass in the outfield isn't making you drop the ball.
You must step back. Look at the slinky. Understand that the invisible structure of the system is dictating the behavior of everyone inside it.
You have to map the feedback loops. look past the immediate triggering events, and search for the trim tab.
It's a completely different way of existing in the world. It requires moving from a mindset of certainty to a mindset of inquiry.
And to leave you with a final provocative thought today, we want to look at the very end of Donella Meadows' incredible work in Thinking in Systems.
It is perhaps the most profound point she makes. She acknowledges that we live in a society, and particularly a business culture, that is absolutely obsessed with control.
We want to predict the future perfectly. We want to optimize every single metric on the dashboard.
But complex systems are inherently unpredictable. They are full of nonlinearities, hidden delays, and bounded rationality. Therefore, true mastery of a system isn't about becoming an omniscient conqueror who perfectly plans the future.
True mastery is having the humility to expose your mental models, to abandon your rigid certainty, and to learn to simply dance with the system.
Dance with the system. I love that imagery. We have to learn the rhythm of the structures we live in. We have to respect the delays and the feedback loops before we try to change the song.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us. As you go back to your own life and your own workplace today, look around. Try to spot the invisible structures. Question the quick fixes. Look for the trim tabs. And until next time, stop obsessing over the snapshots and start looking for the whole picture.